All right, guys, sorry I'm missing class today, but I did want to talk to you about the continuing conflicts in the Middle East. These are the standards that we're covering today. You can take a look at those. All right, so we've already talked about the Ottoman Empire. It was a very successful, large empire that lasted over 600 years. Originally, the Ottomans were a nomadic group of people from Central Asia that originally settled in what is today called Turkey. The Ottoman Turks were known for their ruthless pursuit of land. At its height, the Ottoman Empire was 6 times larger than the size of Texas. So if anyone's ever been to Texas, you realize how large that state is. Its land stretched from what is now Turkey and parts of southeastern Europe, northern Africa, and southwestern Asia. So here is a map of the Ottoman Empire. So over time, the Ottoman sultans were not very capable of ruling and the empire began to decline. During World War I, the Ottoman Empire sided with the Central Powers who ended up losing the war. So we talked about this a little bit in our class on Monday as well. Afterwards, the government collapsed and the land of the former Ottoman Empire was divided among the victorious European countries. The League of Nations, who then became the United Nations, gave France and Great Britain control of partitioning the Ottoman territory. After partitioning, France took control of Syria, Lebanon, Algeria, Morocco, and Tanzania. The British were in charge of Egypt, Iraq, Palestine, Jordan, and a chunk of Saudi Arabia. Great Britain heavily influenced the governments that were put in place in the territories it controlled, and for years, these countries remained under British supervision. The problems created by this land division have persisted in the Middle East even today. We looked at this map on Monday for just a minute. So as far as the new borders go, Great Britain and France desired immediate control of the land in order to control oil profits. So everybody wanted their hands on the oil that's found in the Middle East. So they quickly drew up new borders. Unfortunately, because they were in such a hurry, they drew borders without regard to which tribes, religious groups, and ethnic groups would be forced under one government. And as a result, these groups had little in common. Arab countries were not consulted about the division of the territory. As they divided the land, they drew borders that paid no attention to local cultures. This caused some ethnic and religious groups to be separated by boundaries, while other rival groups were grouped together. Claims over land led to long periods of conflict and bloodshed in the region. For example, from 1980 to 1988, Iran and Iraq fought a war over disputed oil-rich territory. Here is a mural that Iraqi soldiers are posing in front of an Iranian leader. All right, so we talked briefly about the ethnic group called the Kurds. Another problem created by the land division had impacted the Kurds, which of course is an ethnic group that have lived in the region for centuries. They are a rather large population. However, they did not get their own territory when Europeans partitioned the Middle East. The Kurds were divided between Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Iraq. These countries are uneasy with the vibrant ethnic group and attempted to rule them with an iron fist. All right, so I'm going to pause this for just a second, and we are going to watch a quick video about the Kurds.
In Iraq right now, the Sunni militant group ISIS is fighting against the Shiite-run government for control of most of the country. But those aren't the only groups in Iraq. There's a whole other group of people known as the Kurds who have their own security force and their own autonomous region and government. So who are the Kurds, and what do we know about them? Let's start by looking at a map of Iraq. The Kurds live in this area, which makes them seem like a small group, but if you pull back, you see that the Kurdish people actually live across a large continuous block of the Middle East that spreads across Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. It's commonly known as Kurdistan. There are anywhere from 15 to 20 million Kurds living in this area with their own language and culture, and about 4 million of those are living in Iraq. Kurds by religion are Sunni Muslims, but they existed prior to Islam and they were resistant to the Arab military expansion that took place in the 6th century. In order to create the first Sunni Caliph all those years ago, Arab forces had to defeat many different Kurdish princes and feudal groups. So as a result, Kurds don't self-identify as Arabs the way that most Sunnis and Shias do. Again, this all started in the 6th century, and to say the least, modern history has not been kind to the Kurds. In 1920, the Ottoman Empire fell, which resulted in the Treaty of Sèvres. This formed the nations of Iraq, Syria, and Kuwait, and it was supposed to leave the option open for a Kurdish nation, but that didn't happen, largely because Turkey, Iran, Syria, and Iraq refused to recognize Kurdish independence. Ever since then, they've been a marginalized group stuck in those nations, and they've faced a lot of persecution and oppression. After the Iran-Iraq War, where the Kurds sided with Iran, Saddam Hussein destroyed entire Kurdish villages and used chemical weapons against the Kurdish people. Now, after all those years of struggle, the Kurds finally have military and administrative control over parts of Iraq and Syria. But the fighting in those countries isn't over yet, and stabilization, depending on who wins, may not be a good thing for Kurdish independence. Plus, the Kurds aren't just one united group looking to create an enormous Kurdish nation. They have numerous sub-factions and rifts. When you're talking about the Kurds in Iraq, you're talking about the Kurdistan Regional Government and their Peshmerga security forces. These are the people currently running the only autonomous region under Kurdish control. They're keeping the Kurds safe, and they have a record of assisting the US with their war efforts in the area. The Peshmerga was the group that captured Saddam Hussein in 2003, and they also captured Osama bin Laden's messenger in 2004, which led to the eventual US capture of Osama bin Laden. If you'd like to know more about the conflict in Iraq, click now to see our video on who the Sunnis and Shia are and why they don't like each other.
All right, so just like you saw on the video, the Kurds live in about 4 different countries. So they wanted an independent country called Kurdistan, but that's never happened. So they live up in the mountains of Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. And like she just said on the video, they have had a lot of persecution. A lot of people are racist against the Kurds, and Saddam Hussein treated them terribly, murdered many Kurds, and used chemical weapons against them. All right, so the Kurds were not given their own homeland, which has left the Kurdish people vulnerable to extreme persecution. Throughout the last decades of the 20th century, Iraq's former dictator, Saddam Hussein, attempted to eliminate his country's Kurdish population. Today, Kurds are suffering greatly from civil war in Syria. So here are some Kurdish refugees from Syria. Disputes over religion also lie at the heart of the continuing conflict in the Middle East. Some of the conflict started when Europeans took control of the region, while others date back long before Europeans came. The hostility between Arabs and Jews and among different Islamic factions forms the basis of the region's modern history. We already know, of course, in 1948, the United Nations partitioned Palestine into the Jewish nation of Israel and the Arab Muslim state of Palestine. Palestinians refused to recognize Israel as a nation, and as soon as it was established, fighting broke out. And we talked about that on Monday. Palestine, with help from the neighboring Arab countries of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq, engaged in conflict with Israel that has lasted for decades. We also took a look at this map on Monday. Quite a difference in the territory, or the country now called Israel. Arab nations do not recognize Israel as a nation, and Jewish Israel lives in virtual isolation from its neighbors. There is constant conflict between Palestinians and Israelis living in the area called the Gaza Strip. The land in Israel is sacred to both Jews and Muslims, so that the two groups are constantly fighting over it. So this is an interesting picture here. I just want to talk about this building that's kind of in the background. So this building right here is called the Dome of the Rock. It sits on the most contested real estate in the entire world. This building was actually built here by Muslims, but the area that it sits on top of, all three religions, the Jews, the Christians, and Muslims, all believe that this piece of real estate right here is one of, at least for the Jews and the Christians, the most holy piece of land in the world. And for the Muslims, it's the third holiest. So this sits over where the Jews built their first tabernacle and second tabernacle, sits right here where this dome covers. Christians believe that this, Christians and Jews believe that this is exactly this place where Abraham took his son Isaac. When God asked for a sacrifice, this is the place that Abraham took Isaac. Of course, God stopped him from sacrificing his son Isaac. Muslims believe that when Muhammad had an encounter, he had a dream. He went here to this place and he actually had a conversation with Jesus and Moses, and Abraham too, I believe. And underneath this Dome of the Rock is a rock that God actually used to create the universe. So that's why they call it the Dome of the Rock. So the Muslims put this here to protect that foundation rock. But like I said, that particular place is sacred to Jews and Muslims because of its connection to Abraham and the temple that the Jews built under God's direction when they were wandering in the, the second temple that the Romans destroyed in the year 70 AD. So little piece of land, but a lot of emotions connected to that little piece of land. Here we have some pictures of some Gaza airstrikes. All right, and then just for a minute, we're going to talk about the Shia and the Sunni Muslims. So we've talked about those a little bit. They all consider themselves Muslims. Many conflicts also occur within the Muslim sects in Southwest Asia. As a result of European partitioning after World War I, Sunni and Shia Muslims who were often rivals, were now forced to get along together in one country, which is Iraq. The two religious groups have fought for power in Iraq for decades. The more aggressive Iraqi Sunnis have also clashed with the Iranian Shiites. So here we have a political cartoon that they are so close together and they're constantly fighting each other. And if you look at this map of the Middle East, you see that most areas are made up of Shia Muslims. However, if you look at Afghanistan and Pakistan, the majority of the Muslims there consider themselves Sunni Muslims. All right, and so across the world, there are more Sunni Muslims than Shiite Muslims. Here's another political cartoon. In 1979, fundamentalist Muslims overtook Iran's government and imposed a strict interpretation of Islamic law on all of the country's citizens. Since then, they have worked hard to remove all influences of Western society. All right, you guys, so that's what I have for you today. So sorry I couldn't be here in person, but I will be back tomorrow for our math meeting. So you guys have a good day. If you have any questions, reach out to me and let me know. Have a great day.